So these readings are really helpful to us on this Sunday as we think about how is God in the midst of us when things are broken. And it's easy because it's God that is whole, it is us who are broken. And through the calling of the covenant people of Israel in keeping the law through this letter of Paul to the Romans, the manifestation of the love and the grace and the forgiveness and the generosity of this God, even in the face of evil and opposition to Jesus' teaching and to the disciples on the nature of community. And it is about abiding in God and staying connected to community. And that is crucial to our mending, both as individuals and as a church community and as a nation. Abiding in God and staying connected to community is crucial to our mending for each other. There is an abundant flow of grace, mercy, and forgiveness from the divine source that we call grace. And Jesus teaches us, and the task of community is to allow that to somehow flow through us in the telling of our stories, in those deep, intimate conversations as we get to know each other. And then to figure out what it is in these stories, what it is that we have in common. What are the values and the ways in which we are relating to each other that is consistent with the Jesus story? And how we grow deeper in love with God and fellowship and with one another. There's a wonderful image by Thomas Merton, the great contemporary mystic, and he describes the work of a spiritual director. And it could be expanded to include the function of being part of the Christian community. That the work of the spiritual director consists not so much in teaching us a secret, some infallible method of attaining to an esoteric experience, but in showing us four things. One, how to recognize God's grace and God's will. Two, how to be humble and patient. Three, how to develop insight into our own difficulties. And four, how to remove the main obstacles keeping us from becoming people of prayer. And I really like this definition. How to recognize God's grace, how to see God's grace and God's will in everyday life around us. How to be humble and patient, it's the servant leader. How to develop insight into our own difficulties, and that is often admitting them and maybe talking about that to one another. And maybe it's our brokenness is the thing that connects us in a way. How to remove the main obstacles keeping us from becoming people of prayer. And this definition moves us from the position of certainty, a kind of the six blind wise man, to being a people with glimpses of truth that together hold the truth. And we need each other, warts and all, if we are to experience fully God's grace and to understand the journey that we are on as individuals and as families, as a congregation, and as a country. There's a book called Sacred Contracts by Carolyn Myss, and she gives tangible examples of how a human relationship becomes the sacred ground for another to get an insight about him or herself, what Thomas Merton calls how to develop insight into our own difficulties. And it's often in conflict that that message or those important kind of learnings can be experienced. And for each person in our lives, and you think about people that we may be in conflict with, or there is some form of cutoff that we haven't spoken to that person for years, or maybe it's in our families, we left, or some other person left, and that what was the potential learning in that situation or in that relationship that we missed? And if I were to maybe fill that void with, I need more self-esteem or whatever, And in each case, I could find immediately that my life would change dramatically with each choice that I make in response, in a conscious response to every interaction that I have. Carolyn Myss says this: although we want to be around a person who is enlightened or consciously working on becoming enlightened, we deeply fear the high price of our own enlightenment that this relationship may make us pay. Assuming personal responsibility for the quality not only of our actions but also of our attitudes is a lifetime discipline. We cannot rest in the harbor of blame, so we unconsciously or sometimes consciously encourage our own weaknesses and hold on to our fears and anxieties. As long as becoming enlightened represents isolation for us, we will shun our own empowerment. We fear to realize our highest potential, and this inevitably affects our creative, financial, and career potentials. So the church then is invited to become a kind of model community where the gifts, the interdependent gifts. Paul talks about the eye cannot say to the ear, I don't need you. Where in the garden is the best place to put the orchid or to put that flower so that living thing can thrive. We need sunlight. We need nurture. We need to be in the right place. So the question for St. Paul's is, who are we and what is it? What is the mission of what we are about? You know, last week we had a wonderful preacher, and Bob has served Whosoever Gospel Mission for over 30 years. And it's very interesting when I talk to him about what his mission is or what their mission is. He could just tell us directly. And so I'm going to close with a reflection and an invitation for St. Paul's to think about that. What is our mission? What is it that connects the three different congregations? It's a wonderful diversity. What is it that connects parent exchange with the outreach program? What is it that connects the diversity of people and communities that we are trying to serve and trying to bring and trying to heal along with ourselves as we listen to one another? And maybe the words in our readings today can help us think about that differently. And so I end with Bob's reflection about the mission of Whosoever Gospel, and to think about how can we in St. Paul's Church be able to express it as articulately as Bob does. Amen.